The Far Quest, The Chronicles of Cursoon, Book 1, by R. Jason Lynch, copyright 2016, EMP 2023, all rights reserved. Chapter 8, Cutting a Path. As Cursoon walked back into Myrmerk, he determined that he would not let that foul forest lose him a second time. For this reason, he reached to draw one of his swords. However, when he saw that his hand had chosen fortuity and partly pulled it out, he paused and frowned.
It doesn't seem proper to use my grandfather's noble blade for such a menial task,
he remarked to himself as he slid the fine sword back into its scabbard.
I think this job calls for a more humble weapon.
With that, Cursoon drew out his nameless blade and began to cut his own trail through bramble, bush, and vine. And all the while, his plain sword did the work well and without complaint. Though Cursoon made no impact on how much light broke through the black bog's canopy, the labor of clearing a straight path so distracted the bard that the dreariness of that place seemed to lessen.
And now I shan't become lost,
he reasoned as he looked back over his shoulder.
I've cut a nice clear trail right back to my new friend's bright meadow.
In this way, the bard made his way further into Myrmerk until he guessed, by the rumbling of his stomach, that it was midday. Following this cue, he sat down upon a fallen tree and ate a morsel of stale bread along with a piece of dried meat and a chunk of old cheese. In the middle of eating his lunch, the familiar sound of fluttering feathers came to his ears. Turning, he found that the raven had returned. As before, the large bird ruffled his feathers and let out a complaining croak.
Fine, I apologize for startling you,
Cursoon replied with a slight chuckle, and then he added,
Earlier, I didn't get a chance to ask you how you came to be in this terrible place.
The raven gave no answer but only cocked his head, eyeing the bard.
That's a fair question.
Cursoon nodded as if the creature had spoken to him.
I'm here looking for my family. I suppose you haven't seen them.
Again, the bird said nothing.
You know, this old bog's not all that bad,
he remarked while glancing around.
I definitely prefer it over Blackthorn,
he added in a grumble. As he spoke to the raven, he broke off a piece of bread and tossed it toward the bird. With a little hop, the raven floated down to the morsel and began to gobble it up enthusiastically. Cursoon continued while the bird ate.
Don't get me wrong, Blackthorn is a beautiful forest, but its dark leaves hide cruel thorns, hence its name, he added with a shrug. I would guess that its dark beauty has a way of causing you to let down your guard. If it was ugly like this place, well, I don't think it would be near as dangerous.
The bard stood and brushed the crumbs from his tunic. This action caused the raven to flutter into the air and land upon a dead limb some distance away.
I'm sorry,
Cursoon blurted.
I didn't mean to startle you again. This is a lonesome place, and I'm very glad for your company.
As before, the bird croaked out a complaint. Cursoon took out the plain sword and started cutting a trail once more. While he worked, he continued his conversation with the raven.
My first trip into Blackthorn was with my father,
he explained.
I was near 15 at the time. My father had wisely decided that I needed some time away from my master, the old wizard that I was apprenticed to.
Cursoon paused in his work and glanced up at the bird.
To my disgust, I had discovered that wizardry was more trickery than magic. That's when I tore the point off my hat.
He gestured to his colorful head covering.
You see, the point is shaped like a horn because it symbolizes the wizard's power,
he said from behind his hand, as if divulging a secret to the raven.
The next day, my mother stitched this flat top on to cover the hole,
he added while taking off the hat, setting it on his index finger, and giving it a spin. After replacing his hat, the bard took another swing at a tangle of vines that barred his way. The nameless blade sliced through them like they were nothing more than ropes of sand.
That's where I got this sword,
he said while showing the plain-looking weapon to the raven.
An old knight gave it to me before he died. How I wish that was all he gave me.
He added with a sigh, and then swung his blade as if he was fighting back some imaginary foe. The raven made an odd clicking sound by snapping his black beak together. Kurasoon nodded, as if the bird was putting him back on his task of storytelling.
Right, where was I? Oh yes, my father was taking me to White Wall. The road to the capital city splits at the edge of Blackthorn. The longer way goes around, but the shorter goes right through that dark forest. My father, ever one to save time, took the shorter course. That's how I got this scar,
the bard said, while pointing at a small line barely visible under his right eyebrow.
We were hurrying down the road. It coils like a snake through the wood. My father hoped to be out of Blackthorn before sunset, but as we rushed, a low-hanging branch swept over my brow, and its hidden thorns gashed my eyelid.
Kurasoon paused and ran his thumb over the scar.
A little lower, and it might have taken my eye,
he commented darkly. The bard swiped his nameless sword through a patch of dead brambles, and they fell before him without resistance.
I was still bleeding when Sir Bisette leapt out from the trees and startled our horse to a standstill. The old knight shouted with a booming voice, "Leave this place before the night comes and evil takes you!" After Sir Bisette issued this cry, he promptly collapsed in the middle of the way. His polished black armour clattered loudly as he fell backwards. With little thought of his warning, my father and I leapt from our cart to attend to the old knight. As we raised his visor to feel his brow and check his breath, a much smaller and older man sprang from the shadows. "On hand, my lord!" the little man barked angrily. We found out later that he was the knight's attendant, and his name was Tippleglee. "Ooh!" the bard chuckled. He was a grumpy one.
Kurasoon glanced up at the raven.
Near a month ago, when I searched in Blackthorn for my family, I found no trace of the little man.
Frowning thoughtfully, he smoothed down his short beard with his free hand.
But then he was very old, so I'm sure he passed into shadow years earlier.